Hey guys, I'm Chris Buck and a very warm welcome to Friday Fretworks, and this week we're taking a look at the pedal industry's worst kept secret, an overdrive pedal that in the last 30 or so years you've no doubt heard on countless great records, but remains a pedal that you may not have actually heard of. It is of course the other green overdrive, the Nobel's ODR1. Okay, there's a fair chance that you may have heard of the ODR1. It's experienced something of a surge in popularity in the last few years, despite being the best part of 30 years old. For well over 2 decades, however, it remained relatively in the shadows, despite being the go-to overdrive for countless top-level musicians who, as I said, put it to incredible use on more hit records than you could shake a Strat at. However, I don't think I'm alone in saying that the first time I ever heard of the ODR1 was through Lee Captain Anderton on the Andertons YouTube channel when he adopted it as one of his favourite overdrive pedals. So what is this enigmatic little green box, and why, despite being nearly 30 years old, are we only coming to hear about it now? Unsurprisingly, the ODR1 is an overdrive pedal, manufactured by German company Nobel's. It was introduced in 1993, and in the near 30 years that have followed, it's been in and out of production several times. Now, the particular example I'm using today is an original model that's been rehoused by Throughtone in Nashville. Yet the fact remains that given its layout, its function, and of course its distinctive light green hue, you'd be very much forgiven for thinking that it's just another overdrive pedal derived from a Tubescreamer. It's one of the many common misconceptions about the ODR1 that, despite being the best part of 30 years old, retains its reputation as the tone secret of the pros. Somewhat ironically, the ODR1 was designed to be the antithesis of a Tubescreamer, open and full range, as opposed to imparting its own very mid-range, heavy, nasal, to quote the ODR1's designer, character on your tone. Now you can see a great visual representation of this in this brilliant video by Brian Wampler, where he runs white noise through both a TS9 Tubescreamer and the Nobel's ODR1. You can clearly see the TS9 rolls off the high and low end and really gives a massive kick in that mid-range, around about 720 Hz. By comparison, the ODR1 is much flatter in its response and doesn't really accentuate one frequency range particularly heavily over another. Consequently, it gives you the impression that you're still hearing your guitar and your amp, if only you were able to turn up your amp a little bit louder. So why isn't the ODR1 more highly regarded? As I said, for well over 2 decades, it's been the go-to overdrive for any number of incredible musicians who put it to brilliant use on any number of hit records. However, unfortunately for Nobels, I guess, at least prior to the social media explosion of the last few years, which may go some way towards explaining its newfound popularity, they're not the type of musicians who are going to inspire guitarists the world over to go and buy an overdrive pedal en masse, as, say, Stevie Ray did with the Tubescreamer. We're of course talking about session musicians. For years, the ODR1 was Nashville's best kept secret. Any number of rock and country players heavily relied on it for their core tone. However, by the very nature of session players, ghosts at the top table if you will, its reputation didn't really extend much beyond a relatively small circle of studio musicians, and thus it's rare to see the ODR1 mentioned in the same breath as overdrive royalty. Not for the want of trying, it's worth saying. Tom Bukovac, I think every guitar player's new favourite guitar player since the start of lockdown and his homeschooling YouTube show, has long evangelised the ODR1 to anyone who would listen for well over 2 decades. But it would be disingenuous of me to claim that I was especially familiar with Tom, or indeed his pedal choices, prior to his emergence on YouTube. Another similar example is of course the brilliant Tim Pierce, who, despite his utterly mind-blowing curriculum vitae and all of the work he's done over the years, I don't think Tim would disagree that his influence on the wider guitar community has reached new heights since he started doing YouTube videos some 5 or 6 years ago. A quick look at the Nobel's artist roster reveals a relatively similar story, a comprehensive list of incredible session players and producers whose accreditations, cumulatively or individually, are absolutely staggering, but with the best will in the world aren't the types of people who are likely to inspire guitarists to go and buy a pedal. And thus it really has taken the likes of Tom Bukovac appearing on YouTube, or even Lee Anderton using the ODR1 on Anderton's YouTube channel, to give it anywhere near the audience that it is truly deserving of. One thing definitely worth mentioning about the ODR1 is the center control that's rather confusingly labelled as Spectrum. Now, given its positioning on the pedal, you'd be forgiven for thinking it's just a tone control, and it kind of is, but it kind of isn't. Whereas most tone controls on overdrive pedals simply act as an adjustable filter for the high frequencies introduced as a consequence of the overdrive circuit, the Spectrum control is a double filter which simultaneously controls the lower mids, around 300 Hz, as well as your high frequencies. It's fairly unique in that it actually gives you a very usable range of sounds right across the full sweep of the pot, or spectrum. So what came next for the ODR1? Now, needless to say, after its growing reputation as the tone secret of the pros in recent years, even more so since all of these session guys have since joined social media and more candid about the gear that they've always used, Nobel's reissued the pedal, both as a new mini version and the original version, but featuring a new bass cut. It was a very common criticism of the original Nobels that, if you were using humbuckers or indeed a smaller amp, the amount of bass that the pedal could offer could sometimes overwhelm your amp. Now, needless to say, there's been much discussion as to whether the new version sounds quite as good as the old version, which in itself is quite ironic, given the original pedal had something of a reputation for inconsistency. The circuit always stayed the same, but the tolerance between the components in the pedal was fairly variable, and as such, the sound of the ODR1 could vary quite drastically from pedal to pedal. This is a quirk that's been brilliantly captured in the new ODR1 plugin by Lancaster Audio that I actually stumbled across in researching this video, which, aside from being a brilliant digital recreation of the ODR1 in its entirety, also offers a randomized function, which, as the name suggests, allows you to randomly emulate that component tolerance that you used to get in the original pedal. Ultimately, it's easy to see why the ODR1 has simultaneously managed to amass such a strong cult following, yet still flies under the radar somewhat, and has to no doubt be in contention for one of the most underrated overdrive pedals ever released. It's confusingly green, it was often inconsistent from pedal to pedal, and it was adopted by the crowd that, unfortunately for Nobels at the very least, were least likely to influence pedal sales in the wider guitar community. That said, it's absolutely magical, especially with single coils, of course Telecaster being the adopted guitar of Nashville, and all those session players that put it to such incredible use. It doesn't overly colour your tone, but still has the ability to sit beautifully within a mix, and at the time of writing, the new mini version will only set you back about 60 quid, so it's not really a particularly big investment should you want to give one a go. It's worth saying I have no affiliation with Nobels. I've just been utterly blown away by an overdrive pedal that, in all honesty, I've been wondering why I haven't found one before. As ever, I'm Chris Buck. Thank you very much for watching. Please subscribe and hit the bell icon if you haven't already. And I shall see you next week for another episode of Friday Fretworks. Cheers guys, take care, and I'll see you soon.